Well, as I was looking around the audience, I noticed that there's still no sign of my family this year. It seems as though ever since I've been speaking at Spiritual Renewal Week, they haven't shown up. I just hope it's an odd coincidence. So my name is Melody, and I'd like to speak about talking with God and persuading Him to respond. I was fortunate to grow up in a family where prayer was a familiar practice, not because it was something we had to do being raised Catholic, but because it felt natural to ask for help when we were sincerely in need. So I often heard my parents talk to God, and they encouraged us to do the same. And so we'd ask God to bless most of our meals, even when we ate at places like McDonald's, actually especially when we ate there. And we also prayed for our friends and family members when they were in need. And we prayed for simple things too, like needing to find parking spots. And so what I learned from my parents was that it was fun to invite God into whatever we were doing. And it was important to approach Him as though He were a friend or a Heavenly Father who would help us if we were sincerely in need. I also attended a Catholic school as a little girl, and as a part of that school, the children would all go to Mass every Friday. And I remember there were these long periods of silent time for prayer, and having a restless mind, I would often try to pass the time by counting things on the walls or how many people were present. And there were times when I remembered to talk to God. And I would ask Him things like, why do you seem so far away and silent? Why can't I hear your side of this conversation? I knew that He could hear me, but I was a little confused why I couldn't hear Him. And later, when God brought me to this path, I realized that I hadn't yet learned the techniques that would help me to still my mind and open my heart in order to receive God's response. And I also realized that meditation was one of the best ways to commune with God, because when we're doing it correctly, it's not so much a mental act, but really an act of listening, receiving, and feeling God's presence. And later, when I found Master, it made me realize that I had been yearning for a personal relationship with God, a guru-disciple relationship, where I could have a friend to share all of my thoughts and feelings with, and then to receive guidance in return. And I think Master has been that for many of us and other people around the world. And so how do we talk with God? Master said it is the most difficult accomplishment of all, to have a two-sided conversation with God where He speaks. And many saints have heard the voice of God, but why can't we? Master said it's our intuitive telephonic systems that are out of order. And God is always calling us on that line, but we do not hear Him. And He also said that God does not need a throat in order to speak. It's pretty cool. Because His consciousness is encapsulated in everything, He said that if our prayers are strong enough, those prayer vibrations will bring an immediate vibratory response. I had an experience before I moved to Ananda. I was 17 and in high school preparing to come take the yoga teacher training program here. And I was meditating maybe 5 minutes or less every evening because that's all I could do at the time. My willpower was very weak and my devotion was lacking. And so I created this distance between Master and myself. But I thought I just have to keep putting out the effort, and someday I will become a strong, dedicated meditator. And I know that once I get to Ananda, everything will be different. I'll be surrounded by other meditators, and I'll have the spiritual vibrations to uplift my meditation so I can go deeper and longer. To my surprise, when I was in the program, I struggled a lot at each meditation. It was so hard to focus. 15 minutes felt like an eternity at times. And I just felt like there was this dry emptiness inside that I was longing to be filled with God's love. And I was really hurt by this, that this continued day by day, probably for a week, that I just wasn't getting any results. I was expecting it and trying too hard. Probably didn't have the right attitude either. And so I kind of got to this place of feeling in despair and slightly upset. And I was at a lunch table all by myself, these tears welling up inside. And I began to feel this prayer forming inside. And it said, God, if you do not come to me and show me your presence, the next time I sit to meditate, I will never meditate again. And I was a little taken aback by those words. Would I ever really give up meditation? Of course not. I would always keep trying. But in this moment, I needed to show Divine Mother that I was very serious and upset. And so that afternoon, we got invited to the meditation retreat to see the grounds there. And I went, even though I had seen the place many times. All I could think about was what I had said to God and what his response would be. So I asked if I could be excused, and I realized Babaji's cave would be open. If you've never been there, it's this small, humble temple dedicated to Babaji built in the ground. And I couldn't wait to sit to meditate. So I went in, I sat as close as I could to the altar in desperation, and I closed my eyes, did a prayer, and to my surprise, I felt very calm, very focused. So I began to practice the Hong Sa technique, and with each breath, I felt like I was breathing in waves of peace. And it continued. My heart started to open, and I felt waves of love just wash over my body. And I knew in that moment that I was feeling the presence of God, and he had responded to my prayer. After some time, someone came and told me it was time to go, and on the way home, everyone was talking excitedly, but all I could do was just look out the window and thank God and Babaji for the blessings I had just received. And so what I had learned from that experience was that I needed to get God's attention not just by praying with my mind, but with all the fervor of my heart. A great example of someone who spoke constantly to God was Swami Kriyananda. He always kept this inner conversation going. How can I serve you now, Divine Mother? What would you like me to do, Master, in this new situation? And because of this, there are countless stories of how Swamiji answered people's personal thoughts and prayers. Whether he was doing this consciously or not, I don't know. But what I suspect is that because Swamiji's ego was so free, he didn't have this swarm of egoic desires always hovering over him wherever he went. It was like God's light could just shine through unobstructedly. And because of that, he was a beautiful instrument for God. And Master said that God needs instruments to fulfill his will on this planet. I had an experience with my dad after we had listened to Swamiji give a talk at the Expanding Light. We were sitting in the dining room eating, and we noticed Swamiji come through the dining room doors with a few people who were helping him to sit down behind this table of books that he was offering to sign one of his newest books, Biography of Yogananda. My dad and I sort of caught each other's thought and looked at each other, and my dad said, "Oh no, I forgot my book at home." My dad was staying with me here, and I had just bought him that new book. And I said, "Don't worry, we can go to the boutique right now and get you the same one or any other of Swamiji's books. I'm sure he would be happy to sign for you." It was a rare moment that there wasn't this huge line up in front of Swamiji and that my dad was here visiting, so we both really wanted him to get a blessing. Then my dad thought about it and said, "No, that's okay," and kind of looked down, disappointed. And I thought, we can't give up this quickly. This is a great opportunity. And then I started to think, well, maybe he's right. We don't want to bother Swami. I always get nervous around him anyway. And maybe there's not enough time to get a book. So we both just kind of sat there looking at our food, wishing the circumstances were different. Within a few minutes, I looked at my dad, who was sitting across from me, and this huge, radiant smile and reverent smile lit up his face. He was looking at something behind me that I couldn't see. And in a moment, I started to feel power just coming up behind me, and I heard footsteps approaching. I thought, this must be Swamiji. Before I had time to turn around, Swami was standing right next to me at our table, and him and my dad, their eyes met and their hands reached out and held hands. And my dad said, "Thank you so much." And there was this deep moment between the two of them, and Swamiji responded, "It's so good to see you." And then he turned out the door and left. My dad and I sat there just in disbelief at what had just happened. Why Swamiji chose to come to our table and leave out that door, it must have been divinely planned. And my dad received a beautiful blessing that day, much better than a book signing, I think. And it was like God was saying to us in that moment, you must remove all doubt from your mind that I will come to you. If all you truly want is me and my blessing, I will be there for you in an instant. And there's a Bengali saying that if we give a soul call to God as the universal mother, she cannot remain silent. She has to speak. Isn't that beautiful? Swami and Master recommended that we think of God in the aspect of a divine mother, because the essence of a mother is love and forgiveness for her children, no matter what wrongs they have done. And I also read, when preparing for this talk, that Master said the most beautiful form of human love that God has given us is between a mother and a child. This was really touching for me because I've been experiencing motherhood for the past year and a half, and it truly has been sacred. Now, no one could have prepared me for the challenges of motherhood, that's for sure. Even though our teachings of reincarnation say that each of us have all been mothers many times, for some strange reason, this feels like the first time for me. And there are times when I have to leave home to work for a few hours, and our son Japa, who's a year and a half, spends time with his dad, who they have so much fun together. And whenever I leave the house, I always have to sneak out so there aren't tears when I go. And when I leave, it always feels like a long time that I've been gone. I can't wait to get home and see Japa again. And when I get home, the funny thing is almost every time he notices me, even if he's having a fun time, he gets upset and runs over to me as though saying, "Where have you been? How long have you been gone? How come I didn't notice that you left?" And I'm like, okay, great. Here's all these emotions I have to deal with, but I love to. And I thought this is kind of similar to our relationship with Divine Mother. We may lose the awareness of her presence for some time, maybe years or lifetimes go by, and we think we're doing pretty good on our own, except nothing ever truly fulfills us. And then one day she gives us a glimpse of herself and this touch of love that is so overwhelming we don't know how we ever lived without her, and how could we live another moment. And then we just feel that love, we're absorbed in it. And so I just wanted to close by saying, now that we all have Divine Mother in this lifetime, let us not lose sight of her again. Just like the chant says, blind eyes see the Ma hiding everywhere.